We normally talk to him on Tuesday night. That's still the plan. He'll be here for the whole first hour, but I needed to get a hot take straight away from One Nation's upper house member in New South Wales, friend of the show, and our mate Mark Latham, who is joining us now from what I'm sure is about to become freezing cold in Camden right now. How are you, mate? You sat back, you watched election night. Good. How did the emotional wave go?
Well, it was a fairly amazing night, wasn't it? You saw so many plots unfolding in terms of the politics. Labor's miscalculation that they were so far ahead in the polls they could put anything up there in terms of policy. And I think an interesting development for the Liberal Party that effectively they traded away Warringah for gains in Longman, Herbert, Lindsay, Braddon and Bass out of suburban and regional seats where obviously Scott Morrison was far more acceptable to the electorate than Malcolm Turnbull. I think that was something we all underestimated, how much better Morrison would play in those key marginal seats out of suburban and regional where Turnbull effectively had tanked 3 years ago.
Now, we talked about this a lot on the air. I mean, the media was... this is as bad as Hillary Trump in terms of being able to identify something, but also being so aggressive about pushing inevitability. Laura Tingle umming and ahhing her way through the 7:30 report every night. Oh, it's getting grim inside the Liberal Party right now. Now, I know there was a lot of public data that, of course, said something was on its way to happening. But when one of two options can happen, when Bill Shorten is relentlessly unpopular as he was, and effectively he was, you know, the defining negative of the campaign, guess what can happen?
Well, that's right. You know, the opinion polls are obviously down on their knees. They couldn't even get the exit poll right. How hard is it to get voting intention from people who just voted? So the Galaxy exit poll was even a joke, you know. And I suppose I've been very sceptical about polling, you know, that since the time of Trump. But you are schooled in politics to pay some regard to this. So I was averaging out the polls and looking at the numbers and so forth. Other than your gut feeling, what else can you go on? But I think the interesting thing with the polls, Paul, is that there is perhaps a 3-4% hidden voter factor out there. They don't always manifest themselves, and you don't really find out that they exist in any particular election until the votes are counted. But that 3 or 4% of people, maybe it's bigger, there's certainly a constituency out there. I've got to know them better through One Nation work, but they're people who don't like the system, don't trust the media, would never answer a poll, would be dead set against the things Bill Shorten was trying to do to the country, and they just don't show up in the data. And effectively, I think what happened in this election, they didn't see Clive Palmer as a credible place to park their vote. One Nation, we had the problems with Al Jazeera, but they went to Scott Morrison in significant numbers, boosting his primary vote to stop Shorten. That was the message on Saturday, stop Shorten. And I think that's where the polls got it wrong, and really... anyone who follows these polls as, you know, as gospel in the future, really you're setting yourself up for a fall.
How did you think Channel 2 played it last night?
I thought they were at a funeral, weren't they? It looked like a morgue. It was one of the most depressing things you'd ever see. They talk about cheering up everyone's mental health. You wouldn't have watched Channel 2 on election night. They're all about to have a big sook.
Well, it reminded me of MSNBC during the Trump election, where this can't be possible. I mean, if you're a professional observer of politics and you can't acknowledge that when you start to see, you know, the cat's whiskers going in a certain direction, that, well, hang on, this might happen, this might happen, this might happen, rather than, my goodness, this is not allowed to happen because it was all supposed to be the woke revolution. So what do you think of the fact that the Shorten bus was hit by the Karma bus in the end?
Well, that's what happened, and Channel 2 and also Labor's outspinning that it's something to do with preferences or Clive Palmer's advertising. Well, if Palmer advertising was so effective, why didn't he get any votes? What you've really got to focus on here is the massive disconnect between the leftist elites on policy issues and the rest of the country out in the vast suburbs and regions, because the leftist elites can pay the extra $400 billion in taxes or part thereof. They can afford action on climate change for whatever that means in terms of higher electricity prices, eliminating baseload power, all the energy insecurity problems. For them, that's a stroll in the park. But when you talk about closing down coal, eliminating manufacturing, deindustrialising regional economies, it went down like a Led Zeppelin in central Queensland and also the Hunter Valley, where Joel Fitzgibbon had a 15% primary swing against them. So this massive disconnect, I mean, you can sort of have these Hare Krishna type gatherings at Channel 2 about action on climate change, but out in the real world, it is a stinker.
Well, and that's the thing. I think if there is one seat that absolutely underlines the fundamental problem, it is Hunter. It's not about Lilly. It's the idea that One Nation got 20% of the vote because the people who work in the coal industry had a party on the ballot paper that was actually pro-coal, not just the one they've always voted for. And that, to me, that seat was similar to, again, I'm just drawing the comparisons for those that are sort of half listening, to the Pennsylvania win for Trump.
Well, not only One Nation on the ballot paper, Stuart Bonds, our candidate, a coal miner. And he got 22% of the primary vote, and Joel Fitzgibbon is well under 40% primary. Now, I think people like Fitzgibbon need to have a good look at themselves inside the Labor Party, because he knows that this talk of 50, 70%, 80% renewable, the whole fraud of dispatchable renewable power, it's code for deindustrialising the Hunter Valley, closing down jobs, industries, whole communities that are already struggling. And it is a crime against those people, working people who historically had looked at the industrial labour movement as their great saviour in life. It's the Labor Party now that would be throwing them on the scrap heap. And Joel Fitzgibbon has sat there in Canberra listening to this rubbish for decades and effectively in the public arena done nothing about it, done nothing to defend his community, his workers, his people from economic despair and poverty. Now, you know, people can't do that in public life, Paul, with immunity, and it caught up with him last night.
No, agree completely. Just finally, Albo, Tanya, Jim Chalmers, who should Labor think about going to and who do you think they'll actually land on?
Well, Plibersek would be the favourite because she's very popular in the branches and would have good support in the caucus. But if you thought Shorten was bad, wait till you get an inner-city lefty who believes in open borders, who believes in identity politics on steroids, who thinks income redistribution and 400 billion, that's nothing in terms of extra taxes, and would want to go down the path of 100% renewable, further deindustrialisation, the blackouts, the energy insecurity problems. So you ain't seen nothing yet from the Labor Party. And forget about advertising and preferences. They have a deep-seated problem of policy culture where they've signed up for this nonsense. They've turned away a generation of working people who hate the idea of a Plibersek, a Wong, a Keneally, patronising and condescending and constantly inferring there's something wrong with working people and only these elites know how working people should run their life, even speak their language. Now, this is the basic problem. Working people in this country are not going to put up with it because they're not racist, they're not misogynists, they're not homophobes. We're quite a tolerant, successful people, and they hate being lectured to by these snobs. So if you thought Shorten was a problem, Labor's got bigger problems coming its way.
Good stuff. I can't wait to have you here on Tuesday night. Thanks for doing us a favour on the Sunday night, mate. All the best.
Okay, pleasure. Thanks, Paul.